Welcome back to Wrong Sports, or welcome to Wrong Sports. If this is the first video you are checking out, I actually have about 100 other videos to check out in my archives. Plus, this is episode 4 of my list of 4 videos I'm doing on the worst college football coaching hires. Now I'm going to be doing worst coaching hires from 2010 on. And this will be a top 10 list, and it will be ranked. I'm also going to be mentioning a few others. So if there are any other coaching hires you think I'm not mentioning, you can mention it in the comments below, but please watch the entire video before you comment, because I have had some people who do that and then they don't watch the video and then I make fun of them. So don't do that, because I will be mentioning about 20 coaches in this video. I have a few honorable mentions I'm going to get to right now. First off, John Emby at Colorado. He was hired in 2010. He doesn't make this list. He's a dishonorable mention because he was just a bad coach. And this was his first head coaching job, and he was never a coordinator. So him going 4-21 over 2 seasons at Colorado was not shocking. Next up, this guy routinely makes the list of worst coaching hires in college football history. I will agree this was a bad hire, but again, he just might have been in over his head, and I have found about 12 other coaches since 2010 that were worse than Darrell Hazell at Purdue in 2013. He had that magical year at Kent State when they won 11 games, and he got them to a bowl game for the first time in 40 years. That pushed him to get this head coaching job at Purdue in 2013, and it seems from the get-go he was in over his head. He went 9-33 over 3.5 years at Purdue, and he only won 3 games in the Big Ten. This was another coach like Darrell Hazell who was just in over his head. Jeff Collins, when he was hired at Georgia Tech in 2019. This was a bad coaching hire, but just barely missed out on my top 10 as he went 10-22, finishing last in the ACC all 3 seasons after they had been a pretty consistently good program under Paul Johnson. Again, he was close to making my top 10, and I wanted to make sure he was mentioned because he was terrible, and I know it'll make a lot of people mad if I don't mention him. A hire that I thought should have worked was Kevin Sumlin when he went to Arizona in 2018. He was close to making this list for his hire because Sumlin had been pretty good at his previous stops, but at Arizona he was awful. They went 9-20 over 3 seasons. They probably would have had more losses if that 2020 season wasn't cut short due to COVID, because they were winless that year. And 2 more coaching hires that sort of have a connection with number 10, and the connection is the state of Oregon. First, I want to mention Mark Helfrich, who was hired at Oregon in 2013. He was a by-the-book coaching hire because he grew up loving the Oregon Ducks. He didn't go there, but then he did eventually coach there. Under Chip Kelly, he was the offensive coordinator, and then when Chip Kelly left, Helfrich took over. He had a great first 2 years, but then after Heisman winner Marcus Mariota left, they kind of went on a downslide, as in his 3rd season, they needed to win their final 6 games to get to 9 wins and get a chance for an 8th straight double-digit win season for Oregon. Instead, Oregon would lose the bowl game after they proceeded to give up 31 unanswered points and lose in the biggest comeback in bowl history. And that would start the beginning of the end for Helfrich, as he shuffled up the staff next season, but it didn't help, as Oregon suffered their worst season, going 4-8, and he was gone after that season. The next dishonorable mention went to Nebraska from Oregon State, and I still have questions about how and why Mike Riley was hired at Nebraska in 2015. He predominantly coached on the West Coast. He really had no connection to Nebraska or to their athletic director at this point either. Plus, of course, he was coming off that long run with Oregon State, and the final 5 years he was at the school, he only had 1 winning season. So why did Nebraska choose him to replace Bo Pelini? Well, it might have been because Riley was a much more level-headed guy than Pelini, and Riley wouldn't stir it up with the Husker fan base either, like Pelini did. Riley wasn't too bad in his first 2 seasons, as the Huskers went to a bowl game and were only 1 win away from the Big Ten title game, but then in his 3rd season of 2017, he had some off-the-field issues with a handful of players suspended, plus there was a lot of roster turnover. That resulted in a 4-8 season, and it got really bad at the end of that season, as they lost their last 4 games, and in 3 of them, they gave up 50 points or more, which is something that Nebraska fans were not used to. But don't worry, I will be talking about another Nebraska hire on this list, so just stick around. And before I get into my top 10, make sure as always you are subscribed to the channel below. Ring that bell so you get updates on my brand new videos I will be dropping all throughout the rest of the winter. I have a big series coming up this winter, so make sure you are subscribed and then ring the bell so you can get more updates on that. Also, please check out my Patreon right now, patreon.com/wrongsports. You can help out my channel there. Also, you can help out the channel by giving a super like to this video or to the channel. And of course, like and share this video and share this channel with other college sports fans. So let's kick off the list of top 10 worst coaching hires in college football from 2010 on. Again, these are going to be worst coaching hires that I thought should have been good, or maybe we thought should have been good. Not really bad coaches, though there will be one bad coach mentioned towards the top, so you got to wait for that. And at number 10 is that connection to those last two dishonorable mentions, who would go to Oregon State in 2015. This is Gary Andersen. He's the guy who replaced Mike Riley at Oregon State. And it was pretty shocking when Gary Andersen left Wisconsin and paid $3 million to Wisconsin to take that job in Corvallis, Oregon. Andersen was not an Oregon State alum or had ever coached in Oregon, but he did know the Pacific Northwest pretty well since he coached in Idaho, and he got his first head coaching job after coaching defense at Utah under Kyle Whittingham. Andersen at Utah State started slow with 2 losing seasons before finally earning a bowl bid in year 3 and then a breakout season in year 4 as they won 11 games in 2012. That would earn him the nod to coach at Wisconsin, taking over for Brett Bielema, who left to get more money for him and his staff in the SEC at Arkansas. And Andersen would be getting a big upgrade as he was going from Utah State that won a very dismal Western Athletic Conference with only 7 teams at this point, 2 of which were moving up from the FCS to the FBS, and also the WAC in a few years stopped hosting an FBS football conference, so that shows you just how low this conference was. Andersen, though, would be having big shoes to fill at a Big Ten school. But he did pretty great as he won 9 games in 2013 and then 10 games and led Wisconsin to the Big Ten title game in 2014. Wisconsin would lose that game brutally to Ohio State, and days after that, Andersen announced that he was leaving for Oregon State. It was shocking for most Wisconsin fans and also Oregon State fans who thought they would be hiring a top coordinator instead of a coach with experience and winning experience too. It also shocked Barry Alvarez, the Wisconsin legend, who thought that he had Andersen at Wisconsin for the next few years, as that was what Andersen's contract said. Instead, Andersen paid $3 million to buy out his Wisconsin contract and go west. Andersen's first team was devoid of any real talent at Oregon State, since many had transferred, and Riley's last few recruiting classes were not great. Andersen went 2-10 in year 1 and then improved to 4 wins in 2017, including beating Oregon and probably earning Mark Helfrich his firing. Year 3 at Oregon State seemingly had the program headed in the right direction after 2 improving years, but instead Oregon State struggled to 1 win in their first 6 games, and that win was versus an FCS team. And after Game 6, a loss to USC by 4 touchdowns, Andersen and Oregon State football parted ways, with him foregoing $12 million left on his contract. Andersen was 7-23 with a 3-18 record in the Pac-10. He would go back to Utah State in 2019 and left there after 16 games with a losing record, and he hasn't coached since 2022. He left a great job at Wisconsin, shockingly, to completely flame out at Oregon State and bring them even deeper down. So just a very strange and not so good coaching hire to start out our list. And up next is a guy who took over for Helfrich at Oregon, except it's not that job. It's the job he took after that. It's Willie Taggart when he was hired at Florida State in 2018. This looked like it should have been good because he knew Florida, he coached at USF, and left Oregon after 1 year to take this job. It was taking over for Jimbo Fisher, and that is mostly the reason for this hire not being higher on this list, because he was taking over for someone in Jimbo who didn't like being at Florida State anymore, and it was best for both sides to part towards the end of his tenure. Taggart, however, is mostly mentioned as a bad hire because it just turned into a dumpster fire so quickly. Like, it happened in the first season where it was just a dumpster fire. The first season they were 5-7, which was Florida State's first losing season since 1976. And all of their losses were terrible, as they were by 20 points or more, and the capper was a 41-14 loss to Florida. The only big game they had any chance of winning was versus Miami, and they lost after blowing a 3-touchdown lead in the second half. The next season it would get worse because Taggart had to replace his staff because somehow his offensive coordinator, Walt Bell, got a head coaching job, and he also had to get a new quarterback since DeAndre Francois was dismissed from the school. He would only make it, though, 9 games into 2019, and after a 17-point loss and a 4-5 record, Taggart was done. Again, I put him in the top 10 because he was a good coach at all the previous stops he was at, but this Florida State hire was just not good. If he stayed any longer, he would have just lost more, and he would have lost more of the fans. Also, Florida State spent $18 million just to get rid of Taggart, so that's another reason why it's on this list. Number 8 is another coach that knows Florida quite well, except it's a job that he took in Texas. This is Charlie Strong when he was hired at Texas in 2014. I think a lot of Texas fans and college football fans were hoping for good things when Texas hired Charlie Strong in 2014. Mack Brown had just left Texas after almost 2 decades. Whether he was pushed out by the school or not can be debated, but Texas needed to go with a big hire next, and they chose Strong. Strong was known for his defense as he was a defensive coordinator at Florida under Ron Zook and Urban Meyer, and after helping Florida to win 2 national titles, he went to Louisville for his first head coaching job. He had to clean up the mess that the previous staff left, and I went over that staff in my previous video, but it would take 3 years until he found his footing, and in his final 2 years at Louisville, they would go 23-3. They won the Sugar Bowl in 2013, and after those great seasons, Texas gave him the job of replacing Mack Brown and made Charlie Strong the first black head coach hired in University of Texas history. Strong would immediately set the stage for his coaching run in his first training camp, as Strong suspended or dismissed a number of players for legal or disciplinary reasons. Players went to training camp with blank white helmets, and Strong said they would have to earn the right to have the Longhorn logo on them. This didn't really help, though, as Texas started 2-4, including losing to their rival Oklahoma, and then they finished 6-6. They went to the Texas Bowl and lost that, so they had a losing record. This was only the second time in 2 decades that Texas had a losing record, but he was given time to change the culture at the school. Year 2 saw him and his staff recruit a top 10 class and changing the offense to a spread offense. That would result in a slow start as they went 1-4, but they somehow managed to beat and also look really good against number 10 Oklahoma and end their season beating number 12 Baylor. The only thing was that they had a brutal 24-0 loss to 3-win Iowa State, so Texas would suffer another losing season. The hot seat now was on fire for year 3, and there were tons of changes on the offensive side, and here's a helpful chart for that. These changes brought a good start for Texas as they upset a top 10 Notre Dame team and started 2-0. But then they lost 3 straight, and it wasn't the offense's problem, though, as they scored over 30 points in all those losses, but the defense gave up on average 48 points per game. Strong would tightrope his way through the season, winning 3 of the next 4, but after 2 close losses, with the last one being the end for Strong, as Texas lost to Kansas in overtime after having a double-digit lead to give Texas another 5-7 season, and Charlie Strong was 16-21 with 12 wins in the Big 12, but the losing seasons and no improvement, along with never having an identity on offense and their defense crumbling at the end of his tenure, is a big reason why Strong makes this list. Okay, number 7, which is Todd Graham being hired at Hawaii in 2020. This might seem like an odd hire, but Todd Graham's hiring at Hawaii in 2020 was so bad that it required the state government to step in. But let's start with Graham, though, who had an extensive coaching career at Rice, Tulsa, Pitt, Arizona State, that ended in 2017. He had 95 wins, and he would sit out the next 2 seasons until he got a call from Hawaii, who wanted him to come back to the sidelines for the 2020 season. The first season started off really weird because this was a COVID-impacted season, so their spring practice was impacted, but Graham in Hawaii managed to win his debut, as well as beating a previously undefeated Nevada team to gain a bowl bid. Their bowl bid, which was the New Mexico Bowl, happened, and I mentioned that because a lot of bowl games didn't, and Hawaii would win that, giving them a 5-4 record. The next season of 2021 started slow, but then they scored an upset over a ranked Fresno State team, and they beat Wyoming on the road for their first time in 30 years. They would end their season 6-7, and they were supposed to go to a bowl game, which was the Hawaii Bowl, but that would get canceled. So you had two pretty good seasons for Hawaii, right? Well, behind the scenes though, there was a lot of turmoil, as after the season, a bunch of players entered the transfer portal, including Todd Graham's own son. This pushed the Hawaii State Senate to get involved, and what they found was that Graham was harshly criticizing his players. Along with that, there was an allegation of Graham calling a player playing the ukulele effing annoying, and calling Hawaii a third world country because they didn't have Dr. Pepper in the vending machine. Due to this, Hawaii still didn't fire him, and that might be because the school's athletic department was still struggling from COVID, and they had some budgetary issues. Like they had to replace their stadium, which they're still trying to do. Graham was under contract, even though he was not well liked by the team. He was winning and going to bowl games. But with those mounting complaints and transfers, Graham would eventually resign after the state Senate got involved, and they said they were going to do an investigation, and he didn't want to hear that, so he left. Again, I said at the beginning of this, it's rare to have a Hawaii coaching hire on this list, but when the state Senate gets involved to get rid of you, it merits the ranking. His tenure and the fact that he ran off so many players, including his own son, is still affecting the school, as it was late in the season for them to hire a coach, and they were forced to hire Timmy Chang, who is a Hawaii legend. He was Nevada's wide receiver coach at this point, and he only had a few years calling plays, so it was quite the jump for him. But Chang has been doing pretty good the last couple of seasons. He did actually win 5 games in his second season, and it looks like in 2024, Hawaii might get close to a 6-6 season again. Number 6 is a hire that I think a lot of people forgot because it didn't last too long, but it was dreadful. Charlie Weis, when he was hired at Kansas. No, not when he was hired at Notre Dame. A lot of people are going to be mad at that, but not a lot of people talk about just how bad this hire was. What had Weis done in between the Notre Dame exit in 2009 and his hiring at Kansas in 2012? Well, he had a great 2010 in Kansas City with the Chiefs, as he had a top 10 offense and they went 10-6. He springboarded that into being an offensive coordinator at Florida under Will Muschamp, and Florida would have a terrible offense that year, as they finished 102nd in total offense. So Kansas saw that and was like, hey, come back to head coaching. So he did. He signed a 5-year deal, and he said he wouldn't stay longer than that, even though Kansas was ready to give him more years. Let's push the brakes on these things, please. And this was all before he even won a game. It took him a bit to win that first game too, as they finished with a 1-11 record in his first season, and then they were 3-9 in his second season, and they even won a Big 12 game, which was the first time Kansas won a conference game in over 2 years. The Kansas administration was looking for this third season to finally be a winning season, as they started 2-1 with Texas on deck at home, and after a big campaign by the school and Weis to draw more fans to the game, it still didn't draw a lot of fans because it didn't sell out, and instead had a lot of Longhorn fans at it, all to see Kansas get shut out 23-0, and after that, Kansas had enough and they fired Weis. But don't worry, Kansas still had to pay him the remaining amount of his contract and just added to the amount of money that schools were paying Weis at this point to go away. Like Notre Dame had just gotten done paying him a bunch of money when he got this Kansas job, and now he was going to make a bunch more just after that. But again, this hire is completely forgotten about. I don't know why. It didn't go well. There was nothing positive about it, and it took Kansas quite a while to get better. But don't worry, there's going to be another Kansas hire on this list, so I'm not going to get too much more into the weeds there. Number 5, this is a sad one because I really wanted this to finally happen. I really wanted this to go well when Scott Frost was hired at Nebraska. I mean, Scott Frost was a national title-winning player for the legend Tom Osborne, and like Osborne, after his playing time, he crafted a high-powered offense that drew big numbers at Oregon. That would draw him to UCF, where in 2 years he turned the team from mediocre to 13-0 and a top 10 ranking. With the Nebraska job open, and with many alum and fans calling for Frost to be hired, eventually he was, and given a parade with so much fanfare as a former player was finally going to come back to the Huskers and bring them back to the top. The first season of 2018 started with 6 straight losses, which was a first for a Nebraska squad. But then they won 4 of their last 6 to have one of their worst seasons in Nebraska history, as they went 4-8. This next season started with some promise, as some media outlets actually chose them to win the Big Ten West. They would start 4-2, but then lost a terrible game to Minnesota, and then proceeded to lose 3 more, taking them out of the Big Ten title picture. However, they were still able to get in the running for a bowl game. At 5-6, they just needed to beat Iowa at home. Iowa would instead have the lead most of the game until Nebraska fought back, but eventually lost in overtime, resulting in another losing season. The COVID year of 2020 was a chaotic year, as it thought the Big Ten wouldn't play, but then eventually would, only for Big Ten teams to play Big Ten teams. Nebraska did play 8 games that year. They went 3-5, but they didn't want to go to a bowl game, so now that's 3 straight losing seasons and no bowl games so far at Nebraska, which hadn't happened since the 1950s. 2021 was a make-or-break season, and Nebraska's new athletic director, Trev Alberts, gave his friend Frost another shot, but put him on a short leash, as Frost's contract was restructured, and he would fire a bunch of assistant coaches. But the 2021 season for Nebraska might be the biggest kick in the balls of all time, as they went 3-9, and 8 out of 9 of those losses were by 1 possession. Many thought that would be it for Frost, but it wasn't, because Nebraska was so close to getting to a bowl game. They just couldn't finish out games, so they thought maybe he could finish it out this year. He would go out and hire Mark Whipple, who coached Pitt's offense to an ACC title the previous year. Plus, they got some big transfers. However, that didn't help either, as Frost only made it 3 games into 2022, as they started with an embarrassing loss to Northwestern, who would only win 1 game that year. Then after a 45-42 loss to Georgia Southern at home, Frost was finally taken out. He made it longer than most on this list, but I'm just sad this one didn't work out. It hurt me too, because I'm a big fan of Frost. I loved his time at UCF, and I really thought it was going to work here. He ended his Nebraska tenure with a 16-31 record, and never finished higher than second to last in the Big Ten West. I said I was going to mention a Kansas coaching hire again, and I will at number 4, because this is Les Miles when he was hired at Kansas in 2019. We all thought that we had seen the last of Les Miles after he was done at LSU, but when his friend Jeff Long got the athletic director job at Kansas in 2018, he was looking for a big hire for the football team and called Miles. Miles had not coached since 2016, but he was a national title winner and had a proven record of winning. Plus, it was Kansas. They had nothing to lose. There was nowhere to go at this point. But Miles and Long seemed to put Kansas deeper in the hole after their 2.5 years together. First off, Kansas would be 3-9 in their first season, and they would win a Big 12 game as they beat Texas Tech by 3. But there were rumblings behind the scenes that something in Miles' past was about to come into the open. That wouldn't happen just yet, because the 2020 season was ruined and we were all distracted with COVID. Due to the restrictions on practice and games, Kansas were dreadful as they went 0-9 and lost all 9 of those games by 2 touchdowns or more. In addition, players were starting to riot against Miles since he was putting the team through dangerous and excessive practices, which resulted in players leaving. But the real big issue that ended Miles' tenure at Kansas was a sexual harassment allegation hanging around since his time at LSU. Miles had told his friend Long that there was nothing to worry about and that it would be cleared soon. But on March 5th, 2021, the claims of Miles and LSU female students came out, and Kansas put Miles on administrative leave. Maybe hoping there was a way out, but 3 days later it was official that Miles was out. And the next day, Long was out too. The reason for Long being done was that he didn't vet Miles at all and used his friendship with Coach Miles as all the vetting that he needed. So the hiring was not only terrible for Kansas on the field and off the field, but it also took apart the athletic department. Fortunately, Kansas did make a good hire in athletic director Travis Goff from Northwestern, who in turn would pick Lance Leipold for the football job, who was winning more than all the Kansas coaches mentioned on this list combined. And we're going to be doing something special at number 3, because I'm going to have 3 coaching hires all from the same school, and it's all from the decade of 2010. I'm sorry, Tennessee fans. I'm going to mention all 3 football coaches that were mentioned starting in 2010. That means we get Derek Dooley, who was mentioned a lot as a bad coaching hire. If you don't know him, he was the son of a legendary SEC coach and was a well-known name in the South. After his brief time as a head coach at Louisiana Tech, then he was also an athletic director at the school. He was okay at Louisiana Tech as they went 17-20, and due to him taking over what Tennessee officials called a tough job at Louisiana Tech and turned them around, Tennessee would hire Dooley to do the same. When he came to campus, the recruiting period was basically over, as Lane Kiffin, the former coach, left a little late. Along with this, Tennessee was now at their 3rd coach in 3 seasons, and many players had left, so Dooley had a lot of work to do. The first season was slow as they were 2-6, but they did win their final 4 games to get to a bowl game, which they would lose in controversial fashion, and I won't get into it. The next year, though, with some of their own recruits and players, Tennessee didn't improve, as they went 5-7, scoring single digits in half of those games, and only winning 1 SEC game, which was in overtime over Vanderbilt. This gave Dooley the recognition, which I'm sure he doesn't want, of coaching back-to-back losing seasons at Tennessee, which was the first time it had happened in almost 100 years. The 2012 season was going to be a big one for Dooley as he brought back many of the starters from the previous year. They would win their first 2 games, and they scored a lot of points. But then they lost a terrible game to Florida at home by 17, and that was the beginning of the end, as they would win only 1 more game for Dooley, and after a horrifying loss to Vanderbilt. And can you remember the last time that Vanderbilt beat an SEC team 41-18? But anyway, immediately after that loss, Dooley was done. He had a record of 15-21, and if it wasn't for their interim coach winning their final game versus Kentucky, Tennessee would have gone winless in the SEC. So Dooley, who didn't come in with the highest of regard, left with a negative regard. And the next coach was Butch Jones in 2013. When he was hired, he was coming from Cincinnati, and Tennessee was looking for him to be as good as Brian Kelly was when he left Cincinnati to go to Notre Dame. Year 1 was a rebuilding year and another losing season. He did improve the next 2 years, and year 4 was looking like a potential double-digit win season. They started 5-0 and they were ranked in the top 10, but then a close loss to Texas A&M, and then they lost by 39 points to Alabama, and then they would cap a 3rd brutal loss in a row by losing to last-place South Carolina. To now be 5-3. They did finish the season going 3-1 to have a 9-4 record, but their offense, which was averaging close to 40 points a game, only averaged 25 points in those losses. And because of losing those games, especially the one to South Carolina and to Texas A&M, they missed out on their chance for the SEC title. Jones was given a 5th year, and it was tough since most of the previous year's team graduated, so we had a younger roster. But they did start pretty good as they were 3-1, but then they played 4 SEC opponents and they lost 3 of them in horrible fashion, and were at 3-4. So now with the team barely hanging on to a bowl invitation hope, they lost 50-17 to Missouri, and Butch was fired the next day. He went 34-27, which is better than the guys he sandwiched in between, but he went 14-24 in SEC play, which is still better than the previous guy. But the fact that he couldn't compete in SEC play on the field or in recruiting was a big reason why he was done. Also, what didn't help was that there was a lot going on in the athletic department in his final year, going into the next year, and I'll go into that with the next coaching hire, which was Jeremy Pruitt in 2018. This wasn't so much about the on-field results, even though that was mediocre. It was more about what was happening off the field. Pruitt was a well-known high school coach in Alabama before getting on the Tide staff after he rose up to be defensive coordinator for Alabama. Then at Florida State and Georgia, he would win 5 national championships as an assistant. And Pruitt wasn't the first choice of Tennessee and their athletic director at this point, John Currie, who had apparently made a deal to hire Greg Schiano, but after fan uproar nixed that, he then went out to go hire Mike Leach. But what he didn't know was that Philip Fulmer was waiting in the grass to strike and take him down, and then hire his own man in Pruitt. That is the short summary of that story. So Pruitt would step into a very weird situation because Currie was also fired as well due to this whole situation, and Philip Fulmer became the athletic director with Pruitt as coach. It was very strange and weird, and Pruitt would be 5-7 in his first season, but end up with a top 15 recruiting class, so things were looking good. 2019 Tennessee would win 8 games, including a Gator Bowl. But then the 2020 season came and there were all sorts of weird things, with a lot of players having to sit out since there weren't enough teams to fill bowl games. Tennessee at 3-7 got into the Liberty Bowl, but that bowl game would never happen, as Tennessee had to withdraw due to players, including Coach Pruitt, testing positive for COVID. That ending was a downer for a coaching run that was kind of a downer, because Pruitt went 16-19 through 3 seasons, but most of those wins were later vacated, as the ending of his season got worse as he engaged in Level 1 and Level 2 recruiting violations, which involved paying players, lying to the NCAA, and just not being cooperative. These violations gave Tennessee the go-ahead to fire him with cause, meaning they didn't have to pay him, and also it saved them a lot of money because they actually gave Pruitt a contract extension before 2020, so they got out of paying him a bunch of money in the buyout. Pruitt's firing and the violations also hit Fulmer because he would be done, but he would actually leave on his own, so he wasn't officially fired. But Tennessee would make a good hire next in athletic director Danny White, who they got from UCF, who then hired Josh Heupel. The reason why, though, Pruitt and all of these Tennessee coaching hires are so high was because neither one of them really did all that good. I would say Butch Jones probably did the best out of all 3 of these guys. He was consistently good in the middle, but he just fell apart at the end. Dooley was just bad from the beginning, and nobody liked him. And Pruitt looked like maybe it could have been good in that second season, but then COVID ruined it, and then all the violations, and no one liked him, and it just didn't work. So that's why the Tennessee coaching hires in the 2010s are going to be at number 3. Coming in at number 2 is, this was a guy that everyone recommended, and I already knew he was going to be on this list. Chad Morris, when he was hired at Arkansas in 2018. This guy was terrible, and he really didn't come into Arkansas from SMU with tons of praise because he was only 14-22 at SMU in the American Athletic Conference. They never won the AAC, and the turnaround that Morris did from 2 wins in his first season to 7 in his third season wasn't even the biggest turnaround in the last 2 decades for SMU. But one of the biggest positives that Morris had was that he was a successful Texas high school coach, and he was able to recruit all over Texas, as he got a lot of those players to SMU over the last 2 years that he was there to improve their roster. That would entice Texas's neighbor Arkansas, who were always fighting for East Texas recruits, and they would go out and hire Morris in 2018 to replace Brett Bielema. Morris, however, did not perform well on the field, as Arkansas under Morris were dreadful. They were 4-18, and they were 0-14 in the SEC. The closest win that they had in the SEC was a 4-point loss to Ole Miss and to Kentucky. The offense wasn't bad, but their defense was, and Morris couldn't get the good Texas players, or at least couldn't get them fast enough, because he only lasted those 2 years. And here's a stat. Morris is the only full-time Arkansas coach. Some of these guys on this list, and also the next guy, but he is routinely mentioned as one of the worst head coaching hires in college football history. He really didn't do anything good, and Arkansas is still trying to get over this hire. But number one, this shouldn't be shocking to a lot of people. It's DJ Durkin. When he was hired at Maryland in 2016, this guy is hated in some parts of the country, and it's really no shock since he was only coach of Maryland for 2 years, but in that short time, he managed to ruin this program even more than it was until his tenure was finally finished due to a terrible tragedy. DJ Durkin would play and also was an assistant coach under some Hall of Fame coaches and big names. First, he played at Bowling Green in the late 1990s. Then, immediately after graduating, he stayed on to assist under new head coach Urban Meyer. From there, he would move up the coaching ladder as he coached under Jim Harbaugh at Stanford and at Michigan. And then he coached under Dan Quinn when Quinn was running Florida's defense. After the 2015 season he spent at Michigan, he was chosen to be the new head coach at Maryland. Maryland were taking Durkin since he was a defensive-minded coach. He was also a pretty good recruiter, which Maryland needed, and his first season started pretty good as they were 4-0, but then they got blown out by Penn State and Minnesota, and then proceeded to barely get into a bowl game, which they would lose, to finish 6-7. Things were looking good to start 2017. As they got a big shootout win over Texas on the road. Unfortunately, in that win, they would lose their starting quarterback and their starting defensive lineman, and the injuries would start to take a toll on this team that started 2-1 as they would finish 4-8. Even though they took a downslide this season, it would get even worse in the offseason. A few weeks into spring practice on May 28, 2018, 19-year-old offensive lineman Jordan McNair would collapse. He was airlifted to a local hospital where he stayed for about 2 weeks with a body temperature over 106 and his body showing signs of extreme exhaustion. He would receive care for 15 days and receive a liver transplant, but he would unfortunately pass away on June 13th. After that, an investigation was opened and found that unethical practices were done at the school from Durkin and their strength and conditioning team. Durkin would be placed on suspension and then eventually fired a few days later. He is so high on this list, and he's got to be number one because not only did he put his team at risk, but he put the entire school at risk as well. Also, they weren't good either as they completely crashed in that second season. Their new athletic director had to remedy the situation as well and clean up the football team, and it seems like they had done that with Mike Locksley, who was hired in 2019. Maryland has been up and down the last couple of years, but you can't get as bad as Durkin was when he was there for those 2 years. But anyway, tell me what you think in the comments below about the worst college football coaching hire since 2010. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Please check out my Patreon, patreon.com/wrongsports. And please give this video a super like because it has taken me a lot of time to do these videos. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day.